came upon this Good News Mountaineer garage thing. I have to say I didn't think it would work. The concept of it was to get people to donate cars, fix them up, and provide them to poor people so they could get to work or job training. Great idea. I knew from all my advocacy work with really low-income people that transportation was a huge deal. If you lived on a bus line, your rent was going to be a lot higher. In this southern West Virginia, family still provided a lot of support. So if your family was in the country, getting a car was a huge thing. So when they said, you can just move on a bus line, that was giving mom-alls can't watch the kid when it's sick and the kid can't go to school. You have to miss work. They gave up a lot of support just because they couldn't keep the money together. So I knew it was a good idea, but I thought, man, West Virginia's awful poor. But we had a grant from the Benedum Foundation, got a contract with DHHR to see if it worked, if this would actually get people off. And amazingly, it did. It's still in existence. It's probably the largest one in the country that does what it does.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got national awards as a rural initiative program that people in Appalachia know what it's like to be poor. They might not be poor, but it's like the drug epidemic. You'd be really hard-pressed to find someone in this state that's not had some relation, neighbor, church member's kid or whatever that's not been affected. And it's the same way about knowing people that are poor, good people that are poor, that they are but for the grace of God, Yeah. Tremendously successful. I just went to something last week, and they're over 2,500 cars they've given out. 13 years, 14 years. We started out 75, and now they're probably going to give out 250 cars this year. But the time we were in business long enough to collect data, about over 90% of our people that had gotten cars after a year were either off welfare completely or in a job training program that would lead them off.
Actually, I'm a third-generation miner on my father's side out of McDowell County. Probably a fifth generation from my mother's side from Mingo County. She was from Merrimack, in between Matewan and Williamson. And her and Dad had this 90-mile separation while they was courting, which is very unusual back in the early 1950s, But somehow or another, love managed to find a way, and my brother and I came along. We lived in a coal camp up above the mines that I remember. My first experience was coming down the mountain, sitting up on my brother's back on sleigh riding in the winter. Cold air brushing my face, and I'm sitting up, and we're going around this curve, and my younger brother, about a year behind me, we're sitting up, my older brother's laying down, and there's about 10 sleds hooked together, but the feet, all sleds from the company store, coming down through the coal camp, through Suicide Curve, by the old, it was a two-room schoolhouse, they changed into a Baptist church, is where I went, all dirt roads, and we'd come down there, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile, and we would end up at the other end of the camp. Burke Holler Coal Camp had 100 families, and we'd get down there, and the fathers would have good fire built for us in the metal barrels, and mothers would have snack cakes and hot chocolate and such. Just a wonderful time, just a wonderful experience. Nobody ever locked doors. If you got in mischief on one end, time you got home, that old belt hanging on, that mining belt hanging on a nail there. I didn't get hardly any of that, just a scare mostly.
Well, it was getting close to Christmas. In fact, it was the Friday before Christmas. And this is the first Christmas I'd ever been a paper boy. So I went out to collect my paper out. And the lady gave me $1. And I said, I'll have to come back because you're my first customer and I don't have any change. She said, no, I want you to keep that for a Christmas present. I was shocked. I almost fainted. So I went to the next door, the next house, and that man gave me 50 cents. As I went around my route, I didn't get something from everybody, but I'd say at least 85 to 90% gave me something, either a quarter tip or 50 cents. And I got a few of those other dollars along the way. Well, I was excited. My pocket with the secret money was really getting big. I said, boy, wait till I tell George. He's really going to be shocked. And his route ended about where my route ended. And I got to the last customer, and I was heading down the street, and I could see him. And I went running down toward him. I was going to tell him, before I could tell him, he said, "Harry, you're not going to believe what happened to me." And he was having the same experience. That Saturday, we walked uptown to the National Bank of Commerce in Charleston. And we asked the teller, said, "We'd like to change this money into $10 bills. We'd like for them to be brand new $10 bills." And it was kind of our tradition. At Christmas, we decorated with a tree. And underneath that tree was like a little village. We had paper houses, and there was some cotton there to represent snow, and little fake trees around and everything. It was also a tradition in our house. And on Christmas Eve, we'd each get to open one present. George and I went in there, and we started taking those $10 bills, and we placed one by a little tree and another one over here in front of a little house. We were putting them all around underneath this tree. Then we didn't say anything. Well, my mother got finished, and she came in and sat down on the floor where the presents were, and we all sat there, and she reached over and got a present for George and one for me, and we were opening them. And all of a sudden, she let out a big squeal, a squeal of delight. "Woo! Look what I just found. It's a brand new $10 bill. Wonder where that came from." We didn't have any idea where it came from. We decided maybe Santa Claus brought it. "Woo!" She let out another squeal. "Look, I just found another $10 bill." And she let out a squeal with each one she found. She squealed until she found all 11 of those $10 bills. Now, I know George and I both got a present that Christmas, but he doesn't remember what he received. I don't remember what I received. But we will never forget the Christmas we gave the $10 bills to our mother. And I think those two little boys, almost 12 years old, learned that it truly is more blessed to give than it is to receive.
Well, when I was in the 8th grade, we had a principal that was very lenient, I suppose you'd say. I would go to school of a morning. There's several of us, 8 or 10 of us. We would go to school, but we didn't go to school. We went to the YMCA, had a basketball court, and we played basketball and whatever. And then it all would come around to where the building was high off of the ground, the YMCA. So we'd crawl under there and play poker. We'd go home at lunchtime, and we'd come back and we'd play. I don't mean we played poker all the time, but that was part of it. And we'd stay till school's out. We would go out and we'd go home. My grandmother never knew I was going to school every day. And the principal would come by. There's a bridge here across to the school. He'd come by and say, "What are you boys doing here?" "Well, we're on phys ed." And he could do that 3 times a day, and that's what we tell him. And he'd accept it and go on.
I was coordinating my dad and I to mow.
Okay.
He helped me get started. And actually, we were mowing. I say we because he helped a lot. He did all the weed whacking. I couldn't even hold a weed whacker at that point. But he would drive me around in his car. We'd load it up in the back of the trunk, and he'd take me to all the places I had to mow. Most of them were, I grew up in a neighborhood that I pushed my mower whenever I wanted to go. But I did have some yards that were, you had to drive to. So he'd load up the mower and the weed whacker and the blower, and we'd go and we'd whack and blow while I mowed, and then we'd go on to the next one. And I think by the time I was 15, I had 21 yards, just hopped around all summer, had the best tan in the subdivision, and knew everybody. And actually, I did just the weirdest jobs. I took care of older people and walked people's dogs and cleaned people's houses and trimmed people's shrubs. And I had keys to half the people in the subdivision's houses. Just a really weird sort of things, but people trusted me and I trusted them, and we just, I don't know, it just kind of took off. That's where I got my love for working for myself. Blood, sweat, and tears, that'll get you somewhere.
My great-grandfather started that dairy farm down in Nitro, and then my grandfather was the one that was probably the primary person because he picked up immediately. And my grandfather built a house over in St. Albans. And he ran the ferry, so he didn't have any problems going back and forth across the river then because he was running the ferry. The ferry was right where the car dealership is, but behind it there's a boat landing and lots of boats parked there. Right. And the other side of it was at the end of Blackwood Avenue, which is a dead-end street. It used to cross the railroad tracks there, but they did away with that a long time ago. And the railroad station was right there. And wherever they put a railroad station, they named the station after whoever's farm it was on. So that was called status then. When you came there, you got off the train, you could get on the ferry and cross to St. Albans. My grandfather mainly operated that ferry. He kept operating. They built the bridge, which is used to be called the Status Bridge, which is called the Dick Henderson Bridge now because some legislators decided they wanted to name it for somebody else, so that was fine. When they built the bridge in the late 1930s, they offered my grandfather payment to give up his certificate to run the ferry. Because if you build the government, if they build something there's already something existing parallel to it, they're supposed to pay for it. And my grandfather said no, he would just keep operating the ferry, which he did for quite a while. He would undercut the tolls on the bridge. So if you had more time, you could save a little money and ride the ferry. But if you wanted to get across quick, you paid a little more money.
That's actually what pushed me out on the river, and the river really was a great opportunity and became a career. I started off working at Amherst or Madison Cole, right. And working on the Canal River. The port down there in Point Pleasant, all the Ohio River boats, the bigger Ohio River boats from all companies drop off empties or loads, and they get sorted out down there. Depending on where they got to go. And what Amherst pretty much does on the canal is they meet those barges down there at Point Pleasant and build a tow of 9 and bring them on up the river. Usually the loads are chemicals or different forms of gravel and sand, but the majority of them are emptied. They're empties, and those go all the way up to Quincy, below Montgomery, all up in the, where all the coal loaders are, and then they get filled up, and then we pick up 9 coal loads and bring them back down.
I was born 4 days after my mother voted, the first time women could vote, and she told everybody my age. On the 75th anniversary of women's rights to vote, or they interviewed them on television, and she said, my mother didn't want me to go out because I was in what they call the family way, and nobody goes out and their big belly. And I said, I'm going to vote. And I got in the buggy with Robert, that's her husband, and I went to vote, and 4 days later, Roberta was born. And everybody that was with me watching this on television started laughing, My mother was always a women's libera from all of her life. I've heard the stories many times about her sewing a V in her skirt and making like culottes out of it, and getting on a horse astride and riding down through the neighborhood and just shocking everybody. She was a teenager then, so, you can imagine what she was like. And I'm the oldest of her 10 children, and having babies didn't slow her down. She liked to dance, and I think she danced before we were born because I loved to dance. All my siblings, we all liked to dance.
Charleston was going through the transition of the Triangle District being dismantled. Mm-hmm. And that was around the church, and a lot of that work had started before I came. And so for a long time, I saw vacant land where the town center mall is now. I was told that the block, which was where the church was located, was the hub of black life and culture. In other words, the block was to Charleston what Auburn Avenue was to Atlanta, in terms of how it was that place. But the thing that surprised me was that it was downtown. Because black folk, they don't establish downtown. And for Charleston and for First Baptist to be in the heart of downtown was different than what I had thought I would find. Black life was distinctive. It had been a special place on the block, but it was in process of being dismantled.
My mother's side of the family all came here to Charleston in order to work at Libby-Owens Ford glass plant. They were all cutters. They came from Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather came first when the plant first opened in 1917. And then soon thereafter, my grandfather followed and his brothers. And so pretty much by the time it was all over, all of the men, all the families on my mom's side had come here from western Pennsylvania. If your father was a cutter, when you got old enough, 16 or 17 or so, you began your apprenticeship under him. So it was really a generational thing. And that's not like you didn't have a choice in the matter, but it was such a secure and good way to earn a good living that it was a difficult choice to turn down.
I have always been proud of Charleston in terms of its race relations. I think maybe there were segregated schools, but there was no real animosity or racial strife in Charleston. And of course, as I started practicing law, I've known black lawyers with whom I've had a very good relationship, and there's black doctors. And of course, as the laws changed and the rules changed, we became more integrated. But there was never any, after all, we're not Southern here in West Virginia. We're mountaineers. I'm happy to say that I've never felt anything about my being Jewish has affected any success or failure I've ever experienced. I mean, when I was in the country in Sweet Spring, they called me a Hebrew. That's what they understand. That's what they got that out of the Bible. They didn't know what that meant, except that there were some religious implications. But nothing I ever achieved or failed to do was due to, I think, my being Jewish. I think that's Charleston.
And I also had an experience with one of the dairies, ice cream. So I can't recall what the name of it was, other than the fact that it was a ice cream. We went to an ice cream counter. It was downtown because I walked with my daughter. She was not quite 5, as I said, to this ice cream parlor. I don't know if it was a parlor, but anyhow, they sold ice cream. And I thought we would walk. It was a hot day. We'd sit down and have a dish of ice cream. And they gave it to me in a bag and said I could not eat it in that store, that we were not allowed to eat in there. So we had to take the ice cream and go home.
Most Sundays we spent there, dinner for everybody. My grandmother, she didn't know how to cook for one. And the kids ate last. So, we didn't get much. But, and normally the whole family was there. I mean, you take 9 kids and then grandchildren, there's not going to be a whole lot. And everything that we ate came off the farm. Mm-hmm. They didn't do store-bought stuff. She made the bread. She canned everything. They had chickens, they had cows, and, it was all fresh stuff.
Considering I wasn't really from Mullins, I was really from Herndon, and then from there up in the country. I mean, I'll never forget the first day I went to Montgomery and as a student, and brought my suitcases and all, moved into Old Main, was attempting to move into Old Main, and set my suitcases out of the car, and I don't even remember who brought me there. But anyhow, I forgot one of them out there in the street, and they disappeared. And here I didn't have any shaving gear. All my underwear was gone. And here I never been in a town before. I knew nothing about Montgomery. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a way to start off this 4 years of school.
Yeah, Nitro High School at that time, I was the last class that went all 6 years, 7 through 12, at the old Nitro High School. We were the last class that did that. My high school class was a very special class. They really were. Everybody got along, which you just don't
hear about. You know, we were basically an all-white school. We had one black student, and she fit in with just everybody. You know, and last year she graduated the year before me, and last year at their 50th anniversary, she went to it. We didn't know black and white. Yeah. And, you know, when in our 7th grade, when I first went to Nitro Junior High, you know, you met a lot of new people for the first time. And of course, you had the Mountain Boys, which didn't have the best reputations in the world. We were all thugs, or they called us hoods. Actually, back then they called us hoods. We weren't, but that's how they thought of us. And they were the city slickers. City slickers from Nitro. Think about that.
We used to hang out in a pool room called the Hub, and it was there at Courier Street, not quite to the corner, but it was between McFarland and Dickinson. One Friday night, Richard Butler was there playing pool, and there was this guy that came in there, and his name was Jay Sugarman. And he was a great big guy, big around. He looked like Jackie Gleason. And he was a student at Morris Harvey College, and they called him Minnesota Fats. And he came in, and he was working at a nightclub on Hale Street called the Roaring Twenties. So he asked Richard Butler, he asked Richard, he said, would you like to come up here and wash glasses for $10 a night? Well, none of us had a pot or a window, so he took the job. And then later on, he became a bartender, and George Jarrett, my friend, he became a glass washer and then a bartender. Well, I couldn't do that because I couldn't pass. I mean, I was just too young looking. So I went back to the Sterling, and then I became a cook, and pretty good cook. And I cooked there mostly through high school.
Down there at Shawnee Park, the Kanawha County Port Farm, most all counties had one. And if you were poor, you didn't get commodities. You went there and you lived there and you had to work. And they had dormitories for the people. And the man who lived at an angle across the street from us had at one time and they raised and canned the food. And then when you get a job, you go off the farm. But they made them work. And it was kind of a good thing. They couldn't sit back and put their feet up and have a check coming in the mail. They had to work for what they got. And then there also were orphans and people who were very old and couldn't care for themselves.
But in 1919, he came here, and in 1919, he gathered some money together, and he opened up what was the Austrian Electric Company, located where Sears Tire is downtown, across from Sears, across from the mall. Yeah. And he bought it from the city livery where they used to shoe the horses and take care of the carriages and do stuff. The basement of it was all dirt, and they had hay and stuff on the bottom, and the smell of it. I mean, I went down there a couple times as a kid. Very earthy.
Flood. Oh, see, that was the old flood, the floodplain area.
Yeah.
Let me add a point there. When the different groups, they called the ethnics, so to speak, the Lebanese, Greeks, Italians, Jews, and I'm sure there were others, but those four, when they came, you didn't come uptown. You could not live where we are sitting here now in the upper end of the East End, near the state capitol. You couldn't come up here. You had to live down in I guess they call it the Triangle area. Triangle being, with the two rivers. But as you work your way up, now what Granddad did, he bought a piece of land over on Dixie Street near Kanawha Manufacturing. That's the north side of Washington Street. Our home that we live in right now, 93 years ago, he built it up there, but he couldn't have lived in it. Still wasn't ready. Think about that.
They didn't allow Jews to live in the area.
Everyone lived in a certain environment, within just like a camp. That's what they're called. And they had, the company provided them with a house and all the surroundings. But then they were the two types. There was the black and the white, and they were segregated. They had their own little area, the blacks did, and then we had our own little area. And of course they didn't, but they all used the same company store, and all the other facilities that were available. You know, they had a lot of little houses. They had their own school and lived right on the railroad track almost, you know. So, and they were constantly, interwinding. You couldn't walk down the street and not meet one. Or we didn't have such things as streets. We walked along the side of the railroad. The company store was always there, providing us with everything and taking away everything. They worked for them, and they took everything they made, the company did, took everything back and threw that store. Coal miner, I'm sure there wasn't any possible way they could have saved money. That's just the way they did. We had probably a 4-room house. I can remember it was heated. We had what they call a grate in every room, you know, and they burned the coal, and that's how we got hot water. That's how we got heat, and that's how we stayed warm.
Fruth School was right over behind the Orthodox Church, and that's where I went to grade school. And I can remember that as I walked to school, there were several beer joints, and one of the kids I went to school with, name was Lucas, and they owned a beer joint right there. A lot of family, Flowers Market, there was Icer's Market. Fairmont Dairy was right there, had an Esso station, and DeFranco Grocery. So there's lots of little groceries, stores. Of course, people don't realize now they're right there. 1 block from the Orthodox Church was the National Guard Armory, and they held wrestling matches there. And the beer joints along here always had little posters, you know, the Mass Marvel and Don Eagle, and I don't remember the names now, but they advertised who was going to be wrestling there.
Compared to now, it was thriving then. I'm sure I know there were strikes at the coal mines. Of course, they was very busy. The downtown of Charleston was very busy, and you couldn't walk down Capitol Street on a Saturday without having to walk into the street because the sidewalks were full of people and the stores were full of people. And you thought that that's the way it would be forever. And my father's store, what really caused him to have to close it was the stores like Kmart. First Kmart, then Hecht's, then Walmart. All those discount stores took the livelihood from the independent shop owners.
I had the job of gathering garbage in the neighborhood. We call it slop, for the pigs. And I went all through the neighborhood and put in those 5-gallon cans. One year, my grandfather allowed Romy Hubert, a neighbor, to keep pigs in a separate pen there. Romy lived out the road from me, and as soon as he saw me starting out to pick up garbage, why, he'd head out ahead of me. And he was picking up my customers, you know, people that I served. And he'd get the close ones to his house, and he'd go back home. He had 1 pig, you know. I had 6 pigs I had to feed. Now, he had to walk past the chicken house to get to feed his pigs. So we took a bucket of water and put it on top of the house. We put a 2x4 under it and tilted it where it was ready to pull, ready to go over. We tied a string around it, the bale, and run it down through the chicken house. And when he passed that window, we pulled the string, and he got soaking wet.
My dad
he came in and got a job at True Temper, Kelly Axe, because all of his brothers worked there. So it was kind of, if I know your brother or your sister and they're a good worker, then I'm going to hire you, because it was kind of done that way then. Cool. It was a good reference. So my mother went to work at 14. Mom said she'd come home every evening and she'd be dead tired because of the things. It was more of assembly line things. She's painted hammers. She put boxes together. Mm-hmm. They packed hammers, things like that nowadays is just done on an assembly line, everything that was, And then her younger sister, when she turned 13, she comes to work too at Kelly Axe. And Aunt Opal, Mom said, didn't look as old as Mom did because Mom was tall. She was like me. So my Aunt Opal wears high heels to work. And it was her sister's high heels. It wasn't even hers. She was 13 years old. So she goes to work, and Mom said that she couldn't hardly walk home that evening. And you had to walk. I mean, you didn't, they lived on the west side, but they walked wherever they wanted to go. So she never got home walking.
I believe I was still 5. But they announced that we were going to be vaccinated that day. And a nurse would come to the school and do the vaccination. And so when she arrived, she was dressed in black. She looked like a witch. And she had a little satchel with her. And she set up a little blue light. I guess it was a Bunsen burner. She only brought 1 vial, 1 needle, 1 syringe. And then she took that needle and she passed it back and forth at the flame to sterilize it. And then the kids came one by one. And we had to step up. And man, did it hurt. And we all screaming and yelling and carrying on. And she says, don't disturb that scab. You leave it on there till it falls off. I don't think anybody had a complication from it. And I believe it was for smallpox. I think it was at least a 20 gauge, and that's a big one. And then she'd plunge it right back into that same vial, pull up the next dose, and the next kid stepped up and got their shot. We all were vaccinated with the same needle.
We had to walk to school about 8/10 of a mile, and they had an outside toilet, and we did not have running water in that schoolhouse. I was mid-fifth grade school, and we had a well house with a pump, and as a student, our task was, the teacher would tell us to go in the morning, go and pump water, bring it in for the kids, put in a cooler. But the unfortunate thing was the water wasn't good; it was full of iron, and we really couldn't drink it. The teachers out there were not the best in the world, I guess because it was a country school. We had one teacher who quit mid-year in the 2nd grade, and then we got another woman that came in from Marshall University who was not even a full-fledged teacher. I mean, she probably only had a couple of years of college. And she lived with us because she had no way to get back to the school. And like I said, we were kind of out of town. And but it was not altogether a bad experience either. I mean, everybody knew everyone. There's probably a total of maybe 20, 25 kids at the most in the school, grades 1 through 6. I had 1 or 2 pretty good teachers as well. And one woman had been a teacher at Morris Harvey College, been a professor up there, but then she had a kid that went to school there, so she wanted to make sure her kid got a good education.
I moved here and felt it right away. We live walking 2 blocks maybe from the local neighborhood pool. And when I married Steve, he joined it. And I'd been here only 3 years maybe, 2-3 years. But one day, I had the 5 kids, but we all packed up our gear and walked up to the pool, the 5 of us. Stephen wasn't with us. He might have been working or whatever. And we walked up to the pool and walked into the pool, and I was getting ready to settle down when in the background I heard from a man, "Oh, there's that new damn Jew family." I turned around and I said to the kids, "Don't unpack. We're leaving." And yeah, that's it. We're leaving. And I walked out, and they wanted to know why. I told them why. I said, I'm not going to stay in a place like that. Well, I'm surprised Stephen doesn't remember it well, because the next year he built a pool. It's something you should remember. And we've been in that pool ever since.
So on September 23rd, the day that we would open, we ran a little tiny ad in the paper that said, "Tonight is opening night at Weight Watchers." And my sister came, my mother came, my sister-in-law. The airport had the main runway closed because they were resurfacing it on that day, of course. And when we got to the Holiday Inn on the Canal Boulevard to hold our opening meeting, there was no one in the room. So I said to Harvey, "I'm going to go out in the lobby and see where people are." Well, you know, young people, we didn't know all the things you're supposed to do to open a business. And it never occurred to us that we should put a sign out in the lobby or open the doors. And when I got to the back of the room, I couldn't open the doors. They were like, I couldn't open them. And I couldn't go out to see what was going on in the lobby because I couldn't open the doors. And that's because the lobby was packed with people. They were standing back to back, maybe even belly to belly. And when I was able to bang on the doors and get them to gradually, people shuffle their feet back and the doors open, I learned as we neared the beginning hour of 8 p.m. that I was saying, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Weight Watchers," to 185 people.
We knew the water was coming. We didn't know how bad it would get. So my neighbors had told me, said, "Just stack everything. You'll be fine. It won't get any higher than that." So, and that was not true. The water came over the flood wall. I grabbed Allison literally, and we took off and went uptown because the west end of Williamson is lower, and the water comes, right at you. Ruined, of course, everything. So we had the house. The National Guard came in later and tore it down. I think it's strange. They talk about the flood of 29, 84, and all this. I don't think they realized that Williamson was wiped out in 77. I mean, it got everything downtown. It's never been the same. The businesses are gone. I mean, it's really sad. I lost so many pictures in the flood. I lost my daughter's whole first year, things I'd kept, and things you can't replace. And when it hit the railroad yard, Williamson has the largest railroad yard in the country at one time. And those oil tankers broke loose and started floating. So when they did, they hit certain things and the oil started leaking. I think the strangest thing about the flood is we watched, the water come up 4th Avenue, and one of the gas stations got on fire. Now, if you've seen fire on water, you think, how is that happening?
Daddy wanted very much to go into the service, and his company had him declared essential. And there was some very vitriolic mail went back and forth about that. And so he and a neighbor set up a civil defense joint right next to where we lived in a garage. And he had the hat and all that. But it was very, very pushed on us very much at that time that we had to have blackout curtains in Logan because there was a very large power plant there that supplied coal for a large portion of the eastern part of the United States. And so it was considered strategic. Everybody was really cautioned, the lights, the whole business that you've seen about World War II, how they had no headlights, whatever. And we didn't get our news except via the radio, of course, and then the big deal would be to go to the movies and see footage that had been shot on the various battlefields. That's the way we got that kind of information.
My grandfather came here in the 1880s, and he started the Orthodox synagogue here. There was a Reformed temple here. He came to Charleston, started backpacking up in the coal fields. I don't know whether Thomas Field were here then, but they would go to a supplier of some kind, and they would, on their backs or whatever kind of instrument a backpack was in those days, would carry blankets and linens and the pots and pans, whatever they could handle, and they would walk up the coal fields and sell their merchandise. Made enough money that way, and he sent for his wife, who brought her to Charleston, and they had a house on Brown Street. That's where the first services of the synagogue were, and of course he sent the word back to other people in Europe that come to America. Others that he knew either from his shtetl or from some kind of a familial relationship came to Charleston, and with them they formed the First B'nai Jake Synagogue. And
the first 6 weeks we were here, the nurses all walked out at St. Francis Hospital because they hired a black nurse. They all quit. And our class, we had been here 6 weeks, knew nothing. We had been through the hospital. We had a nurse that, supervised us. But we had to go on the floor and work, floor duty, by ourselves, and we knew nothing. If you worked nights, you worked by yourself. If you worked days, you had one of your other classmates with you. And I remember the first night, you always charted, every shift. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't chart anything that night. Nobody died. I was happy about that. A few came back, but a lot of them got fired and didn't come back at all until they, accumulated more nurses. Her name was Mrs. Anderson.
Now, one of the fun things for me also is getting to know people around the city, from city planning and even the police chief and the mayor, because we've been involved in stuff like that together. And I've really felt good about being able to be involved in, I think, trying to face some of the issues and tough times that the city's going through. And it's not just this city, every city, but at least work on them and be part of it here. There are many, many different individual groups working to try to help things improve. Everything from drug addiction issues to trying to stop to fight kids getting involved, to addiction recovery type places, issues with the police and all those kind of things that are going on, after school programs and in the school type programs, efforts by the school board. About 16 years ago at the church there, we started the Bob Burdette Center with the after school program. That's been a highlight for me of trying to watch and work at the grassroots level. But got to know a lot of kids too, just from working in the same building. And that's been a joy to watch them mature. Sometimes it's heartbreaking to watch them mess up and make bad decisions. But some of the others has just been delightful to watch them make good decisions.
My dad worked there on that same mine. We didn't live there, but he worked there, and he ran a machine that was in he cut the main first coal, a loader in the head of the mines. And he was always proud of how much coal they could dig every day. And then my grandfather got hurt in a slate fall in that same mines, and he was years getting better. It fell on his head and lost his sight in his eye and his ear, and they wouldn't take care of him, and took him years to get any money from them taking care of him for that injury. He finally got a settlement. In the meantime, the family took care of him and my grandma.
They eat beans, a lot of beans. They could get beans from welfare. And after he got some money, he would not let his wife cook a bean in that house, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
Wouldn't do it.
It's all part of growing up in a small town, not a mountain town in West Virginia, more of a agricultural area near the Ohio River. That growing up in the 50s and 60s there, when I think back and look at it, was more like growing up in the 40s. The movies were still very inexpensive. We would go to the Alpine Theater on a Saturday for the matinee. I had two brothers. They'd give me $1, and it was $0.25 each, and then we all had enough for a box of Good and Plenty or something that would last, because it was extravagant to get a candy bar for $0.05, and it would be gone, where you can get a box of Good and Plenty or Boston Baked Beans or something, and you could make it through an entire double feature with cartoons and everything. We thought they were new, but they were the Three Stooges and all that stuff. We didn't go as a family all that much, but when we did, we went to see something my dad wanted. We went to see The Longest Day, which was the big war movie. And I remember, because I had been trying to get, after you're 12, you had to pay adult, and I had been up till 13. I figured if I could work it out, I could go get in as a kid till I was like 14 or 15. But when we went to, I don't remember what was, my dad said 3 adults, and I was busted.
Believe it or not, people talking about busing and all that,
I went to a little black elementary school on Oakmont, and I would bypass a large school called Fernbank where the white kids went. And then, but we went to a little school right off Oakmont. And so from there I went to another school. I went to a high school called Boyd. It's up there on Shrewsbury Street. Jacob Harbor's up there. It was a combined junior high and a high school. Then they built Garnet, and then they left Boyd as a high school. So I finished Boyd. Do you know who came out of Boyd? Dr. John Norman's mother who taught. His daddy, I'm getting a little bit away from me, his daddy was the first black architect here in the state. He was an architect, I hope I'm saying it right, and she was a teacher, but he was the first, Dr. John Norman was the first heart transplant. He started it, but there's deep history here. It just doesn't get out.
We live in Big Chimney. There was where we lived, which was right on the Elk River. We had the woods, a big wooded area, and we would play in the woods all day long. And when my mom would decide it's time for us to come home, she'd step out on the front porch and yell for us. And everybody in Big Chimney heard her yell, so we knew it was time to come home. And our biggest treat, we weren't allowed to go to the river by ourselves when we were young. And our biggest treat for my brother and I, my dad would take us fishing, and we'd go fishing in the river. There, where Cooper's Creek comes into Elk River, there was a swimming hole. We never got to go to that swimming hole when we were young. My dad worked at DuPont then, and there was at Meadowbrook, DuPont had the golf course, which is now Capitol High School, and across the street, DuPont had a swimming pool. So we went. That's where we swam. And then he left DuPont and became a construction carpenter, so we were no longer members there. And then when we got to be in high school, so we'd go to the river and swim. But our parents kept pretty close watch on us. It was a great place to grow up.